Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours. Listeners, get ready for a twist on this episode of Email After Hours. As is in the name, we are typically all email all the time, but today we are going to explore how social media and email marketing can work together. And with the rapid evolution of social media, it's really essential to understand how these channels can complement each other and really enhance overall marketing efforts.
Absolutely. Joining us today, we have Carlos Gil, a distinguished expert in digital marketing with a deep background in social media. Currently serving as a brand evangelist at GetResponse, Carlos has spent 16 years shaping social media strategies, and he's recently ventured into the world of email marketing. His fresh perspective on integrating social media insights with email strategies promises to offer new and valuable insights for our email-focused audience. So welcome to the show, Carlos. Great to have you on Email After Hours with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here, guys. Thank you so much, Danielle and Guy, for having me on Email After Hours. I have to be candid with you and your listeners by letting you know this is probably one of the first email marketing focused podcasts I've ever recorded before. So I'm honored, a little scared, but honored to be here with you.
It's going to be awesome.
Our reputation is we're highly scary, but this, I feel like, will be all fresh takes then. And so before we get into the meat and potatoes, we usually kick off with an icebreaker question. And this is going to be in your sphere, Carlos. So if you had a crystal ball, what kind of social media feature or channel would you envision emerging next? Like, what's the next evolution of how we connect?
A bold prediction I'll make here on your show is eventually you're not going to need human beings behind the controls of any of these devices or technologies that we use. And we're already starting to see that with the introduction of chatbots. We're already starting to see the rollout of CGI AI influencers. And I firmly believe we'll get to a point where all of this will be on autopilot, which brings me really to the thesis of why I wrote into marketing, why I'm even so passionate about email, which I know we're going to talk a good amount today. Yeah, there's just this fragmentation that continues to happen between what is human, what's relatable, what's real, and what's not. What's AI, what's fluff, what's BS. And as those lines continue to get blurred more and more, which it will continue to get blurred, it's more important than ever that we develop just a relationship with our customers, that we sound less AI generated. We sound more authentic, more human. And look, here's the spoiler alert. You can use AI to help you sound more human.
I'm going to coin a term called bot-thenticity. Is that a thing that anybody's said yet?
I've never heard authenticity. If I were you, before this episode goes live to the public, I would find a trademark attorney and I would trademark that.
Well, I think that's a great prediction. I think, fortunately, Danielle, Validity hasn't got a couple of bots hosting Email After Hours yet, so hopefully our authenticity is still playing in our favor. Carlos, moving into the sort of more detailed part of our conversation. So, you're sort of building on that. Do you feel like your experience in social media has given you an edge as it comes to understanding the email channel, that social and email complement each other? Or are you finding them to be completely different animals, or is it somewhere in between?
That's actually a really good question. And there's multiple answers to that. So first of all, the keynotes that I'm doing now on behalf of GetResponse are kind of blending and merging together both of these technologies, being email and social. Look, at the end of the day, your objective is to generate more business and to engage your customers, engage your followers. So in terms of messaging should be one and the same because there should be consistency. So what I've observed over the years working within the marketing department for different brands as a head of social is typically socials, like it's fun, it's edgy, it's provocative. At least that's always been the direction that I've brought to most companies that I've worked for, where I've had the autonomy to kind of introduce that mindset. And then whenever I work with the digital marketing team, which is normally where email marketing sits, like I'm going to just throw it out there. They're boring, right? They're KPI driven. They're just they're checking off boxes, right? And I've always made this argument throughout my career, like, look, you have a fragmented message here. Instead of segmenting your audiences out, just take into account you're speaking to the same audience. So your messaging needs to be the same. Now, the mediums are different. So should you rinse and repeat and post the same content? Absolutely not. Like email and social need to be working together in unison. Like, look, use social media as a way in real time to continue to build relationships and thought leadership and brand awareness for your company, right? Use this to stay on your customers' radars, but make your content in email, make your email newsletter exclusive. So it's where you're driving ultimately your social media followers back to. And that being said, being that there's so much pressure from on the social media side, from the standpoint of these algorithms are tightening up, it's becoming harder to get organic reach. You've got platforms like TikTok that might possibly be going away here in the United States. At least that's been the rumblings now for
We're going to talk about that.
And
We're
just
definitely
know
gonna talk
that.
about
you're putting so much control into the hands of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these elite tech founders and CEOs that are running their platforms that you have zero control. And I can just tell you, like, that right there is a losing strategy. So email, once again, is highly relevant for today's modern day marketer. So along those lines, I am one of those marketers that's very edgy, very opinionated, but I've also got receipts. So I can back up those opinions and those thoughts with receipts. And I don't say that to be egotistical or be cocky or conceited, but there's so much fluff and there's so much BS that marketers share. Like, for example, content is king, right? We've all heard that a ton of times. No one's really talking about community. No one's really talking about one-to-one marketing. No one's really talking about going deep below these platforms. Everyone's talking about surface level stuff, right? Which is, well, you have to produce content. Well, what good is content if no one's consuming that content? Meaning you have no community.
I think I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, actually, because yes, it's true that often, or at least in my experience, when I'm working with marketing teams, like they're in silos and there is a lot of like buzzword, keyword type stuff. And recently on Email After Hours, we have been talking to both guests where we've already put the episodes out and also upcoming guests about how marketers often have like specific goals, but no clearly defined strategy to achieve those goals. So what exactly does it look like when brands have a cohesive strategy where social media and email marketing are both really integrated? Like, how do they differ, but how do they remain harmonious?
I'll have to be candid with you. The majority of the brands that I've worked with throughout my career have strategies for their own channels, but those channels aren't speaking to one another. And I could sit here and spit out different theories. I would just say at the end of the day that marketers, most marketers, whether you're in B2B or B2C, and when I say marketers, I think enterprise, just to throw it out there, because I've spent the majority of my career working for enterprise brands. So I've also owned businesses of my own, but as a business owner, as a small business owner, it's very different because you're pushing all the buttons and you're behind the scenes. So like the strategies like go and you're more nimble and there's a lot of just feel good organic content. Enterprise is more methodical. There's a lot of gatekeepers. And I would say that's what holds a lot of marketers back, smart marketers. At one point, I was a young 20-something-year-old marketer and I was constantly told no. So the more you tell someone no, it's like, all right, F it. Like, I'm going to just do what you want me to do. You want me to just, get content out on Facebook? Like, cool. What do you want me to post? So I think, again, like leadership starts with leadership. And I'm a big proponent of top-down leadership. Based on how your leaders lead, it's going to determine the output of what your employees or what your team produce. So when I have been in leadership roles within organizations, or if I'm brought from the outside to come in and advise, like I'm listening. What are the Gen Zers saying? What are they, like their fingers on the pulse with all these digital mediums? Like, what do they want to see? I think it's thinking through at the end of the day, who are you really trying to reach? Like, if we just really want to talk about strategy at a very high level. Who is it that you're trying to reach? What mediums are they on? And what's the content that they're consuming? The reality is that no one wants to be advertised to. No one intentionally. And I think going back to the conversation of email versus social, it needs to be email and social. How does our content align? So whenever we show up in someone's inbox, the first thing they're seeing from us is not like flash sale or limited time offer or something along those lines, which people right away are red flagging as an ad. And instead, you're having a conversation. And that's the challenge, right, that marketers have.
I think you made a really great point there, which is people don't always want to be sold to. Sometimes they would far rather hear it from their friends or their family, their circle of trust. And they're going to be more responsive to that. And I think certainly Danielle and I have talked about this before. We love it when brands incorporate elements of social proof into their email campaigns. In our minds, it's just a really great way to build credibility and drive engagement.
I like that. I really do. Honestly, we've talked at like no reply is maybe the most common and largest mistake that we see. But kind of leading on from Guy's question and to this point, right? Like, what tactics can marketers use to leverage their social media presence to then boost email engagement, right? Like, for example, and you mentioned earlier, I'm thinking of how social campaigns can be designed to drive email signups. What else do we think is an actionable way that marketers can leverage that?
So that's a great question. Look, the way that I'm comparing email newsletters now as I'm out on the road is I use a lot of analogies, just so you guys know. I'm referring to your email newsletter as the VIP section of your brand, right? It's where you want to drive people to provide them with some exclusive content or exclusive value, whether it's an offer or whatever it might be, sale, an offer, a tip, a life hack, whatever it is your company does. You create a newsletter that you're creating the perception that only the people in that newsletter are going to get access to. And like, let's face it, a newsletter most of the time is free to join, right? So, and it takes less than 10 seconds for someone to enter their email into a form and click an opt-in button and then submit their information. So you're not asking a lot, but it's in how you package it. So a lot of these platforms, right, the way they operate on the social side is you have space for a link. So I'm advising marketers to leverage that piece of digital real estate being your website link to drive people back to your newsletter and intentionally have more conversations. So when you are writing your caption, in the caption, say something or write something along the lines of, if you want more like this, opt in or click the link in our bio to sign up for our VIP newsletter. But it's thinking fundamentally of social networks as tools. Use them as tools to drive awareness and engagement and drive people back to your email newsletter to opt in.
100%. I guess that kind of leads us into our next question. Hot topic recently on Email After Hours, success measurement. And it's great having all of these tactics and ideas, but are they working? And what are some of the key differences in how success is measured across social platforms? I'm thinking email marketers very focused on KPIs like open rates, click-through rates. What metrics are important for social marketers?
I would say the metric that matters the most I won't say will, but what should matter the most is dollars and cents conversions, right? I've worked throughout my career for CMOs that at the end of the day, they don't care how many impressions or clicks or engagements a post got. What they really care about at the end of the day is the bottom line, right? So I get it. A lot of marketers will justify their existence through the top line metrics. Obviously, click-throughs is very important, but that's also going to require that you provide significant value within that email in order for someone to click through. And that gets trickier from there, right? Because if you're trying to convert and get someone to buy, let's just say you're in retail, now you have to ensure that you're walking people through all the necessary steps. You have, again, your workflow automation set up, abandoned cart emails, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say really it starts with crafting your copy, designing your copy to convert, and that's sounding more human and less salesy. And if there's any takeaways that I would love for your listeners to really think about is before you hit send on email, actually, when you go through the process of hitting the test campaign, really analyze, would you open this up? I think, again, a growth hack that marketers should think about in this era that we're in is instead of using the no reply email address, put an email address for a real person. I see this in B2B a lot, that emails will go out from a real person, meaning like at the very end of the email, there's someone's face, there's a name, there's a title for what they do. but their email address is not in the sent from section. And that's a mistake right there. Today's consumer is highly smart. These are people that we've all lived the majority of our lives, if not have grown up with the internet, right? So you can't fool today's customer. It's very difficult. And that's why engagement rates are low. A lot of people blame it on the algorithms. It's not the algorithms, right? It is your inability to be able to connect on a human level with your customer. So again, I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but I think, again, fundamentally, what marketers need to do is take a step back and stop focusing so much on, at the end of the day, what your KPIs are, and get back to the basics.
I cannot let this episode go by without addressing the social media elephant in the room. Carlos, if someone like Guy is concerned about TikTok's privacy practices and doesn't want maybe his details sold, what would you say to him? And also, like, seriously, should marketers be wary of using TikTok?
That's such a loaded question there. So I'm going to pick on you for a moment, Guy, if that's okay. Are you on Facebook?
I am.
Okay. So your information is already being sold every single day.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Spoiler alert, folks.
Feel better, Guy.
These social networks are disguised as social media networks. And to you and I, that's what they are. They give us the ability to share content and to connect. But the reality is that these social networks are advertising platforms. They're in the business of selling ad space. So for every person that puts up a fight because they say, well, I'll never be on TikTok because TikTok is sharing my information to China, they're a Chinese-based company. Well, look, you're already sharing your information from the moment you go on Facebook. No one's reading the disclaimers or the terms of service on any of these platforms. So you really don't know what level of access that you've signed off and given, right? But the perception is such, right? Oh, well, LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, they're all based here in the United States. Like, they must be safe, right? You're still giving your information away. So if you're worried about privacy and data protection, I hate to break the bad news to you, but we're living in a society nowadays where it's very hard to protect your data. You're using an iPhone. Your iPhone is, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but your iPhone's probably listening to your phone calls, right? Your Android is sharing information. All these social networks are sharing information out. All the apps that you download are sharing information out. So I would say just embrace it from a marketing standpoint. Embrace the fact that these platforms give you reach. Again, so many times marketers will complain about the algorithms, and it's not so much the algorithm as it is the end user. It's the marketer, right? If your content's optimized to sell and not engage, well, then you're going to get decreased reach. But what I will say to just keep it 100 is, think of these social networks as casinos, right? The casino is not in business to let you win all the time, but they'll let you win here and there, right? So they'll give you a post that potentially goes viral. They'll give you a spike in engagement, and that creates a dopamine rush. So then what do? Play more. And their version of playing is providing more content. So for the social network themselves, they need the content, because without content, these social networks don't exist. Like, if everyone in the world took a week off from posting on social media, these social networks would cease to exist. Their revenue would plummet, because they wouldn't have people on the platforms consuming content for them to be able to serve more ads.
This has been such an interesting conversation. And I think always interesting for Danielle and myself when, we sort of step out a little bit outside of our comfort zone and learn something new. It's been excellent, but we do need to start wrapping up. So as we finish up, let's tackle a key strategic decision. Yeah, given your extensive background in social, your recent transition to email, if a brand's got to choose where to allocate its resources, would you lean towards prioritizing social media or email, or is it a 50-50 balance? And why?
That's such a good question, right? That's such a good question, because what I will say is that in the hierarchy of importance of channels, email marketing reigns supreme. And it reigns supreme for all the reasons what I've just covered, right? Your social media data, so to speak, is rented land. It's not owned. Your presence on social media, all the content that you produce, it's rented. It's not owned. However, the flip side to that is, if you don't have systems in place to drive people to your email newsletter, then you're not able to grow your newsletter. What I mean by systems is if you're a retail business, you need to have systems in place to drive more people to your, for example, your loyalty program, which now dumps them into your email newsletter. I would say to build relationships at scale, social media is more important, right? However, to activate those relationships, email comes in because the larger that your presence becomes on social media, the harder it is to be able at scale to build relationships unless you have a massive social media. But again, I'm 50-50 on it in terms of I believe email, the hierarchy of marketing tools is the most important channel. It's the most important investment that marketers need to be spending their time on because of the direct one-to-one access and owning that data, so to speak, whereas on social, you don't. However, from a just pure brand awareness, listening, like we've talked a lot about posting, the component that I'm very passionate about that we haven't really scratched the surface on is social listening. Social listening gives you the ability to listen and pay attention to what's being said about your brand, your competition, your industry. And then you can have one-to-one conversations with those individuals. In fact, I just want to point out how I learned about your podcast and how you guys learned about me is I went on X and I ran a search for email podcast and I learned about email after hours and I sent you guys a tweet in a public forum. So I know we're wrapping up this episode. That's a long way of coming full circle. So don't disregard the power of social.
There we go. And I'm so delighted that brought you to us. It's been a brilliant conversation, Carlos Gil, and thank you so much for joining us on Email After Hours today.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. If you want to connect with me, I'm on all the socials at Carlos Gil 83. And also be sure to go to getresponse.com, sign up for a free 30-day trial.
Awesome. And to our listeners, be sure to tune in again in 2 weeks' time. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And of course, visit senderscore.org for more resources to help you become a stronger sender.
And Guy and I are always looking for guests to join us on the podcast. So if any of you listeners might like to join us on Email After Hours, hey, send us a message on X, I guess, if we're listening to Carlos, or drop us a comment or ping us on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours and see you next time.